Why South Sudan? An Every Village podcast where we answer questions about the world's youngest nation. The question of the day is it safe to go to South Sudan? Hello, everyone. My name is Tiana Johnston, and I am the host of this podcast called Why South Sudan? So last episode, we had Blake Jones here in the studio.
Hey, good to be back.
And he's back. So last time we talked about trips. And so I was thinking, who else better to talk about the safety of traveling in South Sudan than the trips master himself, Blake Jones? So, Blake, the question that I'm really wanting to get answered is it safe to go to South Sudan? What is traveling, I know you mentioned or you kind of talked a little bit about, what does traveling really look like, but would love to just kind of get you to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, this is, I'll definitely answer the question, but this is the number one asked question anytime someone thinks about going on a trip. And so we can break it down into a lot of different parts on safety, but the real answer to the question is it depends on who you ask. If you ask any Every Village staff member, the answer is yes, of course, it's very safe to travel to South Sudan. If you ask anyone who's been to South Sudan with a team, they would say, yeah, it's safe to travel to South Sudan. I felt very safe. But if you log into travel.state.gov and type in South Sudan, I'll have a look at it. I'll tell you right now what it says. It says South Sudan Travel Advisory, South Sudan, Level 4, do not travel. Mm. So that is how the United States government views South Sudan. And I've been traveling to South Sudan for almost 13 years now, and every single trip that I've taken on travel.state.gov, it has had South Sudan as a level 4 travel advisory country. And even before I joined, so the past 20 years that Every Village has taken trips, it has said that as well. So it's very typical. Someone who wants to go to South Sudan for the first time, the very first thing they're going to do was first, like I said, ask us, is it safe? Or even before that, they're going to look up, is it safe to travel to South Sudan on Google? And it's going to pull up this, which is understandably very concerning. Tiana, I don't know if you thought that your first trip, that was your process as well.
Yeah. I don't know if I actually ever looked it up. I think I naively went because I was like, the Lord said to go, you just go. I think it was actually my second rotation. Like once I moved there as a missionary, I went back in 2018 for my second stint of being a missionary, and I got really sick. And I think that was the first time that I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like looking at, just being in such a remote village and being sick and what it looks like and everything. But that's also where, there's so many provisions for us as people that, travel over there. We have a lot of benefits that the locals don't have.
Yeah. For sure.
For safety.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we can break down the safety conversation in a few ways. There's the commercial airline travel, the charter airline travel, any travel by road. So that would be kind of the travel logistics, any travel by boat that we might do. And then the in general question is being in South Sudan. Is it safe to be in the locations where we work? We can talk about, is it safe to be in the capital of Juba, and the different towns, like I said, where we work. So breaking it down a little bit, once you get once you've read through the travel.state.gov South Sudan webpage and you come back with, it's just going to tell you don't travel. But once you get past that and say, hey, I trust Every Village enough to say, hey, they've been going and every time they've been on a trip, it said this, travel.state.gov has said this. Okay, Every Village, well, is it safe? Talk to me about the safety. So we're going to talk about airline travel. So commercial airlines, we all fly those, hundreds of times in our life, and it's very similar. So flying from Houston to Denver is the same as flying from Houston to Uganda or Houston to Juba. It's very reputable commercial airlines that take these flights every single day. So that part of it, your comfortability level with just traveling internationally on an airplane, it's very, very, very safe. Probably the safest place that you can be in the whole world is on a commercial airline.
Yeah, don't they say that it's actually safer to fly than it is to drive?
Oh, very, very much so. Yeah. Driving in Houston is, I'd say, the most dangerous thing that I ever do, or any of us ever do. So being on an airplane means I'm not on the roads in Houston, so it's very safe, you know. So that's the commercial airline side, which I think most people are very comfortable with in this day and age. But there is a type of flying that many people have never done, which is required on trips, which I discussed last time, which is flying these single prop airplanes
Mm-hmm.
onto dirt runways, and that can sound really scary because it's completely foreign. You're not in a pressurized cabin. You are, you're flying at 7,000, 8,000 feet, taking off on dirt runways, landing on dirt runways,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very foreign idea for most people.
Yeah, sometimes they have to do like several flyovers because there's like a goat on the runway.
Yeah, and all those things are you're not dealing with that when you're landing with a commercial airline. So that part of it is, in terms of flying, I know really concerns people. But again, every village, I don't want to pick a number and be wrong, but I don't know. Maybe we've landed and taken off 500, 700 times,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even 1,000 times on these trips.
Yeah.
With on to taking landing on and taking off from dirt runways and have never had an issue. But
Mm-hmm.
as Sienna mentioned, yeah, sometimes when you're about to land, there's a herd of cattle coming across the airstrip, and the pilot has to do a low flyover to try to buzz them away, and it's which is pretty cool, but it can seem concerning. I but it speaks to the immense expertise
Mm-hmm.
of the pilots that work for Mission Aviation Fellowship, who do this every single day. They're highly trained pilots. These aircraft are highly maintained,
Mm-hmm.
meticulously maintained, um, by law, by mandate, by the ministry. So that part of it is also extremely safe. Maybe 750 takeoffs and landings, never an issue
Mm-hmm.
with a MAF plane. But it's an understandable concern.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally love flying in the MAF planes. But people have different experiences. I like it way more than flying commercially.
Mm-hmm.
Commercially, I sleep a lot on those planes because it's not a pressurized cabin and you're pretty high in the air, and you can just a little bit less oxygen and you sleep pretty well. And you get to see you see the pilot working, and you can sit in the cockpit, which I invite anyone to do who's on a trip. Just ask the pilot, hey, can I sit in the cockpit with you? And he'll probably let you try to fly the plane a little bit, in the air. So it's pretty cool.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I know. I remember when I lived there, there was like a storm, and we literally flew through the storm. Like it was so amazing just to see out, each side of the window. You could see like the storm clouds and the rain and lightning and everything, but we literally just flew straight through it.
Yeah, sometimes that's what they do, and it is a pretty wild experience. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're in the air, and you're not that far from outside because the
Mm-hmm.
walls are not that thick in the plane, but it's incredibly safe.
Mm-hmm.
So we fly Cessna Caravans into South Sudan. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's the transportation. The plane side of it. Then there's the other side of travel by road, travel by water, which we don't do a lot of with large teams, especially traveling by water. But we do have a location in Nasser where it's just a very flooded area and there's no roads at all, and so the best way to get around is by boat, and that is also very safe. There's life jackets, and the drivers of the boats know what they're doing and are very comfortable on those waters. So you may be on the river traveling from one location to another for 30 minutes, and you're always very close to the riverbank, and there's people along the way, so that's safe. Travel by road is probably the more dangerous form of transportation, but it really depends on where you're traveling by road to and from.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what I would say is really relying on the expertise of our staff on the ground in every village, who keep in mind are living there every single day, and they're traveling around their country every day, and they have a very good pulse on what's safe to do and what's unsafe to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we know that if it's unsafe generally to travel by road between, let's just say, Rumbek and Tanj, then our team will know that, and we won't do that because there could be there. I mean, the reality is there are some unsafe portions of the country where there are bandits on the road who will intentionally set up roadblocks, as you've probably heard of happening in foreign countries. That it's unsafe, but we know those areas where not to travel, and we know the times and places where we should not travel by road.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we know that it's very safe to travel from Tanj to Wow. It's an hour and a half, 2 hour trip, and it's incredibly safe, and there's not any issues along the road or insecurity. And so we'll make that trip.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in general, just being, just know that every village, we're constantly monitoring this with our teams. We know what's safe and what's unsafe, again, because they're on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So um, that's travel by road. And then in general, just being on the roads, it's generally safe because we're traveling in Land Cruisers. In terms of like car safety, we have Land Cruisers that we drive in that are every village owns and operates, so we know their safety limits. We know how to drive them, and we know how to drive slowly on the dirt roads and um, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's transportation. I think the maybe the question in general people want to know is it safe to be in South Sudan?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it really depends on who you ask and where you are. Again, the U.S. government would say no, and I think a lot of their um, advice comes from if you live in Juba, which is the capital of South Sudan, which is a very, it's a very much a developing city, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a large city, and so with large cities comes, as we know, as we even in the U.S., there's can be issues in large cities, and so if you were to look on the website, it's giving a lot of advice on what to do in and around Juba. And I think a lot of that is really valid, and that's why every village is very safe when we're in Juba. And we spend very little time in Juba with teams in general, just airport to hotel, or hotel to airport, which is a short distance. So that's what a lot of the advice is. Is it safe to be in our locations? Tanj, Mavolo, Awil, yes, very safe. We have, again, our teams on the ground are experts in where they live.
Mm-hmm.
They know what's safe and they know what's unsafe, and we really trust them a lot. And it's one of the reasons, you know, why I love. It's another reason why I love how we've given the power of leadership to our South Sudanese staff, because we
Mm-hmm.
really do trust their intuition and what they sense is going on in their country in terms of a security perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So when you travel to South Sudan to stay with every village, you'll be in an every village compound, which is just a piece of land with a fence, and we have day guards and night guards, and you're very safe within the walls of the compound, and you're also safe outside the walls of the compound when you're walking around or you're going on to visit a water well or to a local church. Again, the our team knows very well how to travel, and there's the people of South Sudan in general are just really excited to see people from America come,
Mm-hmm.
and so they want us to be there, especially in the local villages. They really value, like they see, man, these people came from a really long way away, and they're extremely hospitable.
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard very, very, very few tales of anything happening to Western missionaries on the ground in South Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
Count on our hands, one hand, the issues in 25 years, and it's very isolated incidents. And yeah, so I think just very safe. And again, just really want to instill that although the U.S. government understandably wants to caution its citizens from going, we also are there 6 times a year, and we have our teams on the ground, and we really have a pulse for
Mm-hmm.
them. So yeah, you live there for 2 years, and you
Mm-hmm.
give a little bit of your experience too of
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
felt.
I mean, when I lived there, there was actually never a time that I felt unsafe. I mean, I was out walking in the village by myself, um, you know, speaking the language as best as I could and
Yeah.
meeting people and everything. And again, there was never a time that I was unsafe. There was, um, tribal fighting or cattle raiding that came pretty close to us, actually. Like we could hear it at the riverside, shots being fired and everything. And we had a talk as a team of saying, hey, are we going to evacuate? What does this mean? If it comes any closer, what are we, what is our safety parameters? And as a team, what do we decide? And, really having to talk through it and speaking with the locals, especially I think for us, like we're like, well, we want to stay. And, when talking it through with our staff, and they're like, actually, it's better for us if you leave because as a culture that are always going to honor and care for us, that they're going to put us before them, but they know the nicks and crannies. They know where to run, where to hide. Like they just know how to do it because they're from there, and we don't. We would be so dependent on them that it actually would hinder and hurt them. So that was like really eye opening for me, especially when I lived there. But again, I've never felt unsafe. I've loved traveling there every time. I feel at home actually when I'm there in the village. I know
Yeah.
you love Uganda so much, and I know Andrew, Andrew Brown does too. But South Sudan, man, that's my place. That's my jam.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so good to hear that perspective because you lived there
Mhm.
for years, 2, 3 years,
Mhm.
and you lived it every day, and um, can give a very strong word for the safety of the country. But you did mention, the things that can flare up in South Sudan, and I think that maybe the scariest thing for most people is just wondering, well, what if something happened while we're
Mm.
on the ground? What if there's a tribal raid? And I think a couple things on that. It's important to know that if there's any insecurity in South Sudan, it's not going to be because it's a South Sudanese specifically targeting
Mhm.
someone from America, especially
Mhm.
in the village. It's going to be a tribal conflict or a clan conflict that escalates in an area that we may be close to, which luckily right now is pretty minimal
Mhm.
compared to what it was in 2013 to 2016. But the question is what would I even do? What does every village do?
Mhm.
And if that happens, and as Tiana mentioned, we discuss as a team. Now, your situation was a little bit different because you were there long term and you had something else to consider.
Mhm.
What does it mean for me to leave if I'm here long term? And
For sure.
those are really hard questions to ask. But for teams, every village can we do work with Mission Aviation Fellowship to have an evacuation plan
Mhm.
if something happens. And so wherever we are, in Taun, Pavolo, Awil, someone can get us to evacuate to Juba, or to Uganda if there's something that's really serious happening. So they'll fly in the early morning and pick us up and fly us out to safety. We have those procedures in place
Mhm.
through that partnership. So which is, I think, for me very reassuring that
Mhm.
there's always a way out if something does happen,
Mhm.
because it is different than something happening in the U.S. because we know where we can go. We can
You
go
call
back home. We call
911 and
911.
yeah.
And so I understand people's concerns, but every village we have those processes. And so I would say, what I tell people when they ask about safety is you are, I would even say, arguably safer in South Sudan living day to day than you are in Houston, Texas.
Mhm.
Note what I said earlier about the roads driving in Houston. However, the one caveat is in the case of an emergency in South Sudan, you are a lot farther from medical care. In case of a medical emergency,
Mhm.
you are farther from medical care than you would be if you were in the U.S. And that
Mhm.
is a real concern. But we have first aid kits. We have, especially in a wheel and Tanj, we have access to, we have medical care there on the ground if it's a real serious issue. But if you say you get bit by a snake, which I've never heard of anyone ever happening to any traveling missionaries,
Praise the Lord.
yeah, praise God. Or if you fall and break your arm, or if you get some kind of a cut or a burn, you are probably 12 hours away from medical care, either in Juba, depending on the severity, or more likely than not, Uganda. That's just the reality.
Mhm.
It's because there are not lights on these runways. You have to wait until it's light. So if something happens at night, we can call the emergency line and schedule a flight to pick us up in the morning, but you're going to be 12 to 18 hours away from receiving medical care in Uganda. But again, if it's something very, very urgent, we can work with local clinics on the ground where we work that we have partners with and partner ministries. But that
Mhm.
is the only real concern that I would say that I
Yeah.
have. That's different, or I would say uh, objectively less safe than just being in Houston every day.
Mhm. I mean, praise God, what 20 years of this organization, we've never had to, I mean, especially on a trip, we've never had to like medevac anyone out
Yeah,
or yeah. I
yeah,
mean, anytime, I guess back in 2013 when the fighting, broke out in Nasser and we had missionaries there, like they were already scheduled to go out. Like it was just the Lord's
for
provision.
sure.
And
Yeah.
I think that's again one of my favorite things about South Sudan is that you just see the Lord's provision over and over and over
Yeah,
again.
for sure. It's right. Never a medical emergency. The of course we're always going to be hydration is key.
Mhm.
That is another danger, but it's easily solved because we have water. We have safe water to drink on the compound. And when you're on a trip with us, we're going to be making sure you're drinking water. I remember a
Mhm.
recent trip where it's just like just put water in front of somebody who's having a hard time drinking it. Like, let's just, you got to drink, you know. So,
Mm-hmm.
but other than that, there's it's very safe to be there. And
Yeah.
it's yeah, I was right. It's an amazing way to see God's provision. But I would say I would say there's more um maybe risk because it's unknown,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just more perceived risk than actual risk compared to being in America every day. I think in America, we just, especially here in Houston, we just feel safe, you
Mm-hmm.
know, whether we are or not. And that's a really great thing. It's great to feel that way. But in general, we just feel safe driving
Mm-hmm.
from Jersey Village to downtown, even though it's pretty dangerous, you know. In the South Sudan, I think you just imagine it feeling unsafe, but in reality, it's very safe to be there. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really great. Thank you so much for just sharing. And I totally echo it. And I already have a trip planned this year. I think you do too.
Yeah.
So,
Forward to
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're looking forward to this year and many more trips ahead.
Awesome.
But thanks so much for sharing. And we just invite everyone back to the next episode as we answer the question: how many tribes are in South Sudan and which ones do we work with? Take care.